Hi, everyone. We haven't caught up in a while. I have been kind of a hermit for the first part of this year. Also, if you're listening to this episode on the podcast, you can head over to YouTube if you want to have a more visual experience of the transits and the astrology that I'm about to talk about. There's going to be diagrams that pop up as I talk in case you want to look at the actual astrology I'm describing. But anyways, I really want to get more into doing these casual astrology chat type episodes because I want a place where I can be a bit more creative and vulnerable and talk about how astrology is showing up in my life, how it's showing up in the lives of people I know or public figures I just observe. And also maybe you can find certain parts of what I talk about relatable to your own experiences. So what we're going to talk about today is the astrology of an identity shift, because this is something that comes along, I would say, every few years in your chart, is this desire to make bigger changes in your life or come into a new version of yourself. Not necessarily like you're becoming a whole new person, but more like you're tapping into sides of your identity that were just lying dormant, or interests you may have forgotten about that you loved doing as a child, or just feeling like there's some internal element of yourself that's going through a bigger shift. And we'll get into the astrology of like what that looks like and how to navigate those transits. But I really wanted to cover this topic first because it's something I've personally been experiencing over the last several months with that huge Mars retrograde. And this particular past Mars retrograde was so intense for my chart. It started in my first house, sign of my rising, obviously, Leo. And then it opposed exactly my Aquarius sun before moving back into Cancer, my 12th house, where my natal Mars is. So not only does like Mars retrograde a difficult time in general, but when it impacts, and this can go for any retrograde, not just Mars retrograde. But when a retrograde impacts chart placements directly, like to the degree, or you have like a very important natal placement in the same sign and house where that retrograde is happening, that retrograde automatically becomes a bigger deal. And that may be a time period where you do notice a lot of shifts are happening in your life, but there could be also a lot of frustration. And this period of like, I'm really trying to avoid the term identity crisis, but a shift in identity, because you're just feeling like something needs to change in your life, but you don't know what. So yeah, that's how I was feeling a lot of last year. And honestly, I'm still kind of feeling that way, but I'm coming out of it a bit more now that Mars retrograde's over and it's back in my first house. There's less this feeling of being burned out. But I did want to talk about like what I experienced with these simultaneous like first and 12th house activations in my chart, or how those two houses are tied in together. Because I find that the 12th house is a lot about being alone, maybe not necessarily by choice, but kind of feeling like things are falling through in your life or not happening as you had planned, or you're just not having as many people reach out. Like there's this need to kind of like isolate yourself, whether that's intentionally or not, and do some necessary inner reflection. And a lot of the time, like mental health and examining your emotions and kind of self-defeating patterns and limiting mindsets comes up. And you need that 12th house focus before a transit. So in this case, Mars for me moves back into your first house, or just moves into your first house in general. Like let's say you're a Cancer rising and Jupiter is currently in your 12th house. That's about to go to your first house. But what I was saying is the purpose of these 12th house transits is to get you to look more at like, what do you truly want for yourself, and take that necessary time to slow down and not do as much so that you can come forward with the first house transits again and have a better idea of what personal goals are important to you. How can you be more confident as a person? How can you lean into your sense of creativity or what you have to say? and really coming in more into yourself with first house transits. So how I felt this play out in my own life over the past several months, I felt like I was having an identity crisis, both at work and also just like within myself and what I wanted next. A lot of it had to do with feeling this pressure that I had to have a baby. I'm just going to be very vulnerable for a second. I feel like after you get married, there's this huge pressure. And honestly, even when you're just like in your 30s, like I feel like the older you get, there's like this insane pressure to get pregnant and have a child. And this is something that terrifies me. I want to have a kid eventually. Like I really, really do want children. It's just like a strong desire I have. But the process of like the mental process of, am I ready to have kids? And how do you know when you're ready? That's something that just like been on my mind a lot over the past year, but very strongly during this Mars retrograde. And there was a lot of nostalgia for, oh, if I have a child in the near future, I have to leave behind this whole era of my life up until now where I've been free to do whatever I want, travel whenever I want, put work first, and that would entirely change if I had a kid. So I feel like people don't talk about this. I just see my husband's friends, they all have children. And I'm like, but how did you know? How did you know you were ready to have kids? Like, you just make it seem so easy. And for me, it just doesn't seem easy. It seems like something that's very scary. So that was an area of a lot of anxiety for me these past few months. And then I went to therapy and I stopped putting pressure on myself to think I needed to have a kid right now. I know it'll happen when it'll happen. I actually know. I could see the astrology. But sometimes that's hard to know because you're like, wait, how do I mentally get there to where I'm actually ready to have a child in that specific year? Sometimes it's not helpful to know that much because then you're anticipating it and it may actually play out in a different way than you expect. That's what I have found with transits a lot in the past. You can think that they're going to play out one way and they kind of surprise you and take on this different meaning that you could never have anticipated before. So there's been this internal identity shift of sorts in accepting, could I become a parent in the near future? Is that something I really want? And then also with my business, I feel like there's been this desire to create more meaningful content or put more myself into my content in a way that I wasn't doing before. And I kind of, with social media, I had been feeling like I was stuck on this hamster wheel of churning out content surrounding every single transit, and it just wasn't doing it for me anymore. I felt like I wasn't connecting to people in a real way. It was just posting to get the maximum amount of likes on Instagram. So I had to step back from that and just had to slow down in my life and focus on mental health, going to therapy. Started seeing a therapist for the first time since 2019. And then also started working out, started taking care of my body more. And that helped me a lot mentally. So yeah, it's from the outside, it may not appear like a lot of changes have gone on, but inside, who I was before this Mars retrograde felt so much more chaotic and lost than how I feel now that this retrograde is over. And I do feel more certain in how my life is unfolding and what I want to pursue next and how I want to expand my business. And that's a lot through doing more events or really focusing on long form content and wanting to put a lot of effort and time into something rather than putting out content to get attention immediately or get the maximum amount of engagement. So tying this back to the 12th house, first house connection, I needed to take this step back in order to re-find myself. And maybe if you have other 12th or first house transits going on, you can relate in that way. Okay, so let's get into the main topic I want to explore today, which is the astrology of identity shifts and locating when those transits happen to your chart and kind of learning to lean into that or embrace the topics of whatever planet is transiting and the themes of that planet or the themes of the house it's transiting present to you. So I would say the biggest transit for feeling this change in your sense of self, like you're coming into this new version of who you're meant to be and maybe a greater purpose, would be transits to your ascendant and descendant axis. I say descendant too because I'm mainly thinking about the transit of the north and south nodes. That's probably the biggest one in terms of changes to self. When the north and south nodes move into your first and seventh house, and they spend about a year and a half there, and there'll be about a year and a half to 2 year long period of having eclipses across the first and seventh houses of your chart. And I've noticed repeatedly at those times, like looking back in my own personal past and then also observing the charts of people when they've gone through major life changes, this is the number one transit that points to bigger life shifts and someone really coming into like, okay, this is who I'm meant to be as a person, and developing that greater confidence or these more unique interests and not needing to look so much to other people for direction. And it's also interesting to note the cycle of the north and south nodes, because like you'll have this 2 year period pretty much where the north node is in your first house, let's say, and the south node is in your seventh house. And then the nodes move backwards. So the north node will then start moving up the top of your chart, and it'll go up into the 12th house for a year and a half, then the 11th, the 10th. It peaks pretty much at the 10th when either of the nodes are up there. And then you get this downhill decline as it moves through the 9th, 8th, back to the 7th first. And I've started to notice how you can break up your years into these 9, 10-year cycles, basically a decade, where you get the themes of like every single house in your chart and they'll repeat around the same time a decade later. But yeah, I notice how like with the first seventh, the eclipses taking place there, it kind of sets you off in this new life direction, new sense of self. And then as one of the nodes starts to shift up towards the top of the chart, you build upon that new sense of self. And then it's fully realized publicly when either the north or south node is in the 10th house. And then it's kind of a come down and a preparation for that next big identity shift as the nodes move closer to the first and seventh again. So it's a slower 9-year cycle that builds, and like half of it is spent building up to something more public facing and kind of the culmination of what you've been working on and discovering about yourself. And then it fades out, and it's kind of like the sunset period until the next big life shift returns. I just find that so fascinating. And I currently have the nodes in my 8th and 2nd house. So they're about to move back to the 1st and 7th. And that also kind of ties into what I'm feeling. It's kind of like the phasing out of one chapter that's been going on since 2017, 2018. And now it's like, wait, what's next? I feel like I'm on the brink of this new change going on in my life, but I can't fully see what that looks like quite yet. And I do feel like motherhood and getting that confidence to become a parent will definitely play into the first 7th house eclipses for me. So yeah, if you have the first 7th house eclipses quickly approaching, like a Leo or Aquarius rising would, or you're currently in the midst of that would mean you're a Pisces or a Virgo rising, and the eclipses are now back and forth across those parts of your chart. Or you're an Aries or Libra rising and you've recently come out of that cycle. It's important to think about how is a new sense of self unfolding? What are new goals I want to work towards that I'm almost surprised about? And how do I want to make more dramatic changes in my life? Okay, so aside from the eclipses and the north and south nodes, definitely any other major first house transit is really important to note, especially when a planet moves across the exact degree of your ascendant. So I'm thinking most prominently about a planet like Saturn going into the first, That's a 2.5-year period where it's a total restructuring of self and learning to be more of a mature person and take on additional responsibilities. And sometimes that can feel very stressful, like you're forced to grow up in a way that maybe you didn't have to before. And overall, you're kind of restructuring how you think about yourself and how you appear to the rest of the world, and maybe learning to rely more on your own instincts rather than looking at what other people expect of you or what is everyone else doing. Just learning to trust yourself more. And then I find with Jupiter transiting the first house that the Jupiterian topics of education and travel and writing or publishing or spirituality, that's playing a lot into your sense of self and the activities that you're really enjoying at that time that are helping you to shape this new sense of identity for you. And Jupiter's definitely an easier first house transit than Saturn. I would say it gives this more optimistic lens to what you want to pursue and goals you want to chase after next. Whereas Saturn tends to be a bit more depressing at first, where it could feel very stressful and like there's this heaviness on you. So with these first house transits, it's important to note what are the qualities associated with that transit, that planet transiting that part of your chart, and how are the qualities of that coming into the way you view yourself or are wanting to present yourself to the world. So in the case of Jupiter, optimism; Saturn, it's like restructuring, maturity. Aging is a big one when Saturn goes through the first, just realizing, I really need to take care of myself. My body may not be in the best shape it's been in, or I need to be more careful about my health. That's a big Saturn first house transit theme. And then, like I mentioned already, eclipses in the first. Eclipses are just change. So bigger changes and obvious shifts with how you're showing up in the world and also how you're thinking about yourself. So I would always prioritize those. And then you can also look at these longer transits of Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. Those I would really prioritize. When do they come into exact alignment with the ascendant? Because that transit will last, anywhere from 1, 2, even 3 years with a Pluto transit. So it's this more subtle reworking of how you see yourself or important transformation going on within you. I would say other than first house transits, you'll also want to look at where is your chart ruler placed in your chart. So and when are transits happening that are affecting your chart ruler? So let's say you have a Scorpio rising, you're looking at where is Mars in your chart. Let's say you have Mars in Virgo. So even though there aren't eclipses in Scorpio, or Jupiter or Saturn aren't in Scorpio at the moment, none of the outer planets are either, there's eclipses happening in Virgo. So that's affecting that chart ruler. So it could be felt in a similar way to a major first house transit. And the same goes with eclipses or Pluto aspecting your sun, because sun is a lot about sense of self and the identity that you're developing over the course of your lifetime. So especially when you get a longer transit like Pluto, Uranus, Neptune to the sun, that's really having you tap into the qualities of your sun sign and develop them in a way you may not have before. So to recap, astrology of identity shifts, first house transits, sun transits to your sun and transits to the ruling planet of your ascendant, aka your rising sign. And one final one I would add in is transits to the midheaven, although I feel like that's not so much in terms of identity and self, as more as what do I want to put out into the world and what career do I want to pursue, or where do I find passion? What's my life calling? What side projects, what career path lights me up the most? So it has this slant towards more what do I like doing rather than who am I? And finally, I want to wrap up with some transits that I'm excited for in 2025. One is Saturn entering Aries, and the other is Uranus entering Gemini. just excited to get out of this earth water focus. Saturn in Pisces has felt very heavy since March of 2023. I don't know if that's because it's in my 8th house or just like everyone's felt that way because it's Saturn in this very hard to grasp water sign of Pisces, where it's hard to know what's reality and what's not, and just like overly sensitive and emotional. And now Saturn will be more about taking action and actively building something. And I'm just excited to have Saturn in the 9th house because the 9th house is truly my favorite part of the chart. It relates to education, travel, spirituality, like being an astrologer. Having 9th house planets is super common. I don't have that, but I know like a lot of astrologers have like a 9th house midheaven or planets of some sort in their 9th house. What else is 9th house? Different like beliefs, just finding different ways of looking at the world and feeling like you have this greater sense of meaning and purpose in your life and kind of broadening your horizons in that way. And then I'm excited for Uranus to go into my 11th, and just, it's kind of crazy that Uranus is changing signs. Like it's been in Taurus since 2019 is when it fully entered Taurus. And it's probably brought a lot of shakeups and rapid changes and growth and development to that Taurus ruled house of your chart. So the second it enters Gemini, which I believe is like right after July 4th, because I was looking around, doing an event around this for my community, because Uranus is entering my 11th house and I want to do more like group and community activities. But it's early July, it goes in, and then it doesn't fully, it backtracks in the fall, and then it fully re-enters Gemini in 2026. But I do feel like the second Uranus moves into a new house, there's shakeups that go on in that part of your life. And it's very obvious of how like there needs to be a change. Just thinking back when it entered my 10th house in 2018 for just a few months before it fully returned in 2019. In 2018, I still felt this urge of like, there needs to be a change with career. I'm not happy with the path I'm on. That change needs to happen. And then the change didn't happen until 2019 when it fully returned. So the initial desire to have the shift or the change in the Gemini ruled house of your chart may come up this summer. And for people in other hemispheres, that might be your winter. But like the point is July, August, September, October. And then that change might not be fully realized until we get into 2026. So yeah, I'm excited for those. I love fire and air sign energy. Water and earth is definitely harder to navigate in my personal opinion. But I hope you enjoyed this chat and were able to relate to some of it. Would love to hear your feedback, and if there's specific topics you want me to cover in these astro chats. I was going to do one specifically on navigating tough career transitions. I think that was the next one I wanted to cover. But if there are other topics you want me to talk about, feel free to leave them in the comments. And yeah, thank you for listening.